If it's Wednesday, new details emerge on the unprecedented plot against Putin, suggesting top Russian military officials didn't just know about the armed rebellion, some even supported it. Plus, it's Donald Trump's party. Amid more witness testimony, more legal peril, is more evidence of Donald Trump's grip on the GOP and control over the conservative echo chamber. And President Biden hits the road trying to sell skeptical voters on his economic agenda as his campaign faces an electorate that is deeply skeptical of the country's future and the president's abilities to do the job. Happy Wednesday and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd reporting from Florida. We begin today with new reporting on the rebellion that has roiled Russia and raised new questions about Vladimir Putin's hold on power in Moscow. The latest details of what was going on behind the scenes in the days ahead of the revolt read like something out of a Tom Clancy novel. The Wall Street Journal, citing Western officials, is reporting that the leader of the rebellion, the Wagner Group's Yevgeny Prigozhin, was planning to capture Russia's military leadership. This was not about Putin, but the military leadership. And that he was forced to launch his operation sooner than he wanted because Moscow's intelligence agencies had become aware of his plot. Also today, the New York Times was reporting that U.S. officials believe a senior Russian general, the man who once commanded Russian forces in Ukraine for being sacked earlier this year, but still kept in the leadership, had advanced knowledge of the mutiny, raising questions of disloyalty inside Putin's inner circle. The Times also reports that American officials said there are signs that other Russian generals may have supported Prigozhin's aims as well. This morning, a Kremlin spokesperson responded to that report, calling it, quote, speculation and gossip. We should note, NBC News has not confirmed either report, but again, we're dealing with the Russians here, okay? It is a feature of misinformation and deflection and things like this. So all of this, we're very open source about this, and we're very skeptical at the same time. Meanwhile, Putin is trying to restore his image and standing with propaganda projecting calm and control in Moscow and within the Russian military. But as the president and his Secretary of State made clear today, the events of the last few days have made it quite clear that Putin does indeed have a domestic problem on his hands.
This is fundamentally an internal matter that the Russians and Putin are going to have to reckon with. But you had a direct challenge to Putin's authority from Prigozhin. You see dissension in the ranks, and it's not as if you need a satellite to figure that out. If you
by what happened, absolutely, he's losing the war at home, and he has become a bit of a pariah around the world.
The question for Putin and the world is just how deep do these cracks inside the regime go? What happens next? The playbook of most authoritarians when they have had their power questioned is that they need a quick moment to try to demonstrate renewed grips on power. So joining me now, Michael McFaul, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia and NBC News international affairs analyst, and Peter Baker, the chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, former Moscow bureau chief for the Washington Post and NBC News political analyst. Peter, I want to start with you because it's your colleagues in the New York Times that reported this idea that a high-ranking general inside the Russian military leadership, very friendly with Prigozhin, may have been helping on the inside Sorokin. What can you tell us about him?
Well, that's exactly right. And that's, of course, what Vladimir Putin is most afraid of. Not just that Prigozhin was a threat to him, but that it represented something larger. That clearly the theory of the case, as Prigozhin's troops were moving toward Moscow, was that they would pick up support from the regular military. Because, of course, his 25,000 troops, if that's the right number, were not going to be able to overwhelm the entirety of the Russian armed forces. The idea is, as we've seen through Russian history, that regular troops would join in. That didn't actually happen in any large numbers. But this report now by my colleagues suggests why he might have thought it would, right? That he had perhaps connections with top generals about his goals and what he might be doing. Now, there's a report by the Moscow Times, a very well-respected English language paper, that he may, in fact, now be in trouble. So General Sorokin, in fact, he may be arrested. That hasn't been confirmed yet. But, of course, you can imagine what would happen if you were Vladimir Putin and you learned that one of your generals, if not many of your generals, knew what was about to happen.
Look, we have, I'm glad you pointed out that article. I was about to point it out with you, Mike McFaul, but also to say, hey, look, none of us have confirmed it. We haven't. Obviously, the New York Times hasn't. But, Mike, is this Is this a show of force, or is this rooting out somebody who may have truly been a part of this?
Well, Chuck, we don't know. Let's keep saying that. And the Moscow Times have reported it. Lots of bloggers close to following this war have reported it, that Sutter-Viken was arrested. They're saying he was arrested on Sunday, June 25th, excuse me. So we'll have to wait and see. But we do know a few facts. Sutter-Viken was close to Prigozhin. That is well known. He was kind of his handler. He was put in charge of the forces in Ukraine when it wasn't going well. And the bloggers close to the military, the kind of pro-nationalistic groups, they all applauded this. They said, okay, finally we have a fighter here. And then mysteriously, he was demoted and Gerasimov was put in charge, and they were all upset about that. Those are things we know. Number two, Sutter-Viken gave a I don't know, hostage tape. I can't think of a better word. When the rebellion was going on, he put out a video message and he says, Wagner soldiers, Wagner fighters, put your weapons down. I watched that several times. He sounded like he was drunk to me, Chuck. I'm just speculating. He did not look like he was happy to be giving that message. And another guy did too, General Alexeyev, a similar kind of message. And then just hours later, Alexeyev showed up in Rostov chatting with Prigozhin. So there's a lot we don't know here, but I would not be surprised if he was arrested. But it's also, if that's true, very dangerous for Vladimir Putin, because this guy is popular not just with the Wagner fighters, but with Russian soldiers as well.
Peter Baker, are you surprised that Putin seems to have this distant of a relationship with his military leaders? I mean, the idea that somebody that high up could be doing this without his knowledge, I mean, I take it this is not a guy that's in there looking at the maps all the time.
Yeah, I mean, look, Vladimir Putin is a creature of the security services more than he has been of the military, right? He didn't serve in the military, he served in the KGB. So his power base has always been with the modern day versions of that agency, the FSB, the SVR, GRU. He has not been, he's catered obviously to the military over the years, but he's not of them. And I think that that suggests that there is a weakness there, at least in the upper ranks. Now, remember, why would the upper ranks be upset? For a lot of the reasons the ambassador just talked about? The war has been going badly. Their people have been the ones who are getting, slaughtered on the battlefield. They feel like they have not gotten the support they need. The leadership in Moscow, that's Prigozhin's indictment, has been incompetent. And so, it wouldn't necessarily be surprising that the professional military would sour on this war, given how badly it's gone, given that they have been led, in effect, to such a disastrous outcome.
Mike McFaul, how advantageous is it to us publicly to let the world know how much we knew about this, and how much of this is too much?
It's a good question, Chuck. I don't have a great answer. I would say two things. I'm always surprised when the intelligence folks tell us about something that happened and then they tell us, well, we knew about this all along. That's an interesting
well, they always say that, right? Sorry.
I know, but I think it's actually useful, but not too far. It's useful to, at least when I look at it, if the CIA knew about this, weeks ago, surely the Russian FSB, the Russian intelligence, knew about it, and it suggests that they knew about it and they didn't do anything about that. That is another. There are many cuts here at Putin's authority as being really in charge. That just adds to another one. I think quietly, not publicly, we use that information and we use this whole fiasco to talk to people like Xi Jinping and Modi and a bunch of the fence sitters around the world to say, hey, you put your bets on this guy. You said you think he's a strong leader. He's not a strong leader. Things are getting out of control. Why are they getting out of control? Because Putin invaded Ukraine. I think that's really important for people to understand. None of this would be happening if he didn't invade Ukraine. And the longer that war goes on, my prediction is there'll be more episodes like this. So if you're Xi Jinping and all you care about is stability in Russia, and maybe you care about your buddy Putin staying in power, maybe it's time to put a little more pressure on him to say, time to wrap this up so you can get your own house in order.
Peter, do you have any indication that U.S. diplomats are sending that message?
Well, the message U.S. diplomats have sent in the last few days is it wasn't us. This is not some sort of a CIA-provoked, uprising. We had nothing to do with it, because that's usually, the first page of the Kremlin playbook, to blame any domestic troubles on the United States and the West, to say it's all about them, not about us. They haven't done that. I don't know that we've had other kind of communications. I haven't heard of that at this point. Mike might know better, but I think the point is to whatever information that is being put out by the American side is probably being put out selectively in order to undermine the credibility of the regime, for the point that Ambassador McFaul was talking about with their allies, or at least the neutral states like India and Brazil and so forth. But we don't know a lot about what's going on, and it's worth remembering that there are intrigues within intrigues here. Right. And if you're Vladimir Putin, I think the most worrisome thing is you have to look around the room and not be entirely sure who's on your side, who's not.
Yeah, that's amazing. Mike McFaul, the question that I certainly hear the most from people that ask me what I know, and I say, well, I always ask Mike, which is, how is Prigozhin still alive, and do you expect him to survive?
Again, great question. Don't have a great answer, so I'm going to speculate like we all are doing. Thank you, Peter, for reminding us what we don't know. I would say two things. Chuck, if he kills him now, he makes a martyr out of him at a time when all those Wagner mercenaries are still armed. Remember, Putin went on television in this dramatic speech pleading with these guys to join his side. The people that were traitors just a few days ago, he called heroes, and he's trying to split them from the commanders, from Prigozhin and his commanders. So that suggests to me he's still got a Wagner problem. He doesn't want to, in any way inflame them. I suspect if he finally gets that under control, he gets them to a base in Belarus, or they might join some special forces. By the way, he gave another concession in that speech, really important, not getting enough attention. He didn't say you have to join the army, which was the old offer. Right. He said you can join the army or other forces. And that, to me, was a giant concession. You don't have to go fight with Gerasimov, the guy you hate. You can go be part of some special military operations, other people. But once he gets that under control, if I were Prigozhin, then I would be very fearful.
Fascinating. Putin's got to micromanage in so many different ways. That's when you know you are losing your grip. You're not sure which capos to trust. Mike McFaul, former ambassador to Russia. Peter Baker, former Moscow bureau chief, New York Times chief political analyst these days. Thank you both. Let me now bring in a member of the Ukrainian parliament, Kira Rudik. Honorable Rudik, thank you for joining. Let me just start with, look, you're watching what happens in Russia. At the same time, you're still being bombarded by the Russian military. In some ways, how do you keep everybody focused on the mission?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Well, when we were watching what was going on in Russia, we were cheering for both teams, because let me make it very, very clear, there were no good guys there. And indeed, the coup was not stopping them from attacking us almost every single night, and we're not stopping them of launching a missile attack on the pizzeria in Kramatorsk, where 11 people died just yesterday, and our emergency services are still trying to find people under the rubble. However, we look at it as a chance, because we hope that this event was very demotivating for Russian soldiers, because they should be really confused, not knowing whom to trust, and having double thoughts, definitely, looking at what is going on and their potential future, that it is not decided and that things can change really, really quickly. On another point, what we were discussing here broadly in Ukraine was, when we were watching this coup, have you noticed that Russian people, they did not take a part at it at all? So there were no people blocking the streets against Prigozhin, or supporting him and going with him to the Moscow. They were basically like observers. And for us in Ukraine, it is almost unthinkable, because we take like a huge part in everything that's happening in the country. We have gone through a couple of revolutions, and we basically have changed what the world thinks of how the war would go, with the fact that we took it in our hands.
Ms. Riddick, I'm curious how important you think it is for the Russian people to hear from Yevgeny Prigozhin, who very loudly said, hey, this wasn't a Nazi country. They weren't getting ready to invade us. How important do you think it was for a Russian military leader like Prigozhin, even a rogue one like that, to say the same thing President Zelensky had said for a year and a half?
I do not think that Russian people really care a lot about military operation or the mission of it. I think if you take like random 100 people and ask them why Russia invaded Ukraine and what is going on, not too many of them would be able to explain. They would try to repeat what they heard, but they would not think a lot about it. You know, it was one of our major mistakes at the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, because we had high hopes that Russians just don't know what's going on. And if we explain to them well, they would go on the streets, they would protest, that they would try to stop Putin. But no matter how much efforts we and our allies had, it just did not happen. They did not care much. So I do not think that they really reacted to that. You see how they were greeting Prigozhin like a hero, sending him flowers. Right. And I think right now the latest research is showing that he's receiving like 60% of trust of Russians or something. But it's like just like as a symbol, but as a murderer, as like a strong Russian man, a person capable of sending like a bloody hammock to European Parliament, but not a person who is like telling the truth.
President Zelensky next month is expected to ask leaders of NATO for a full-fledged political invitation to go. The fact of the matter is Ukraine may become the largest army in Europe, which raises the question, why wouldn't NATO want Ukraine as a member? But what should the message that President Zelensky should take to this NATO meeting?
We are defending the Europe right now, all European countries, because I think there are no illusions of what's going to happen if Ukraine stops doing that. So this is why we think that we would make the alliance stronger, same way as we would become stronger being a part of the alliance. And this is the most important message. And this is what President Zelensky was saying in the address to Ukrainian parliament today, that we are going to become a member of NATO. I do not think anybody has any like particular objections on that. The problem is with when, how, and what would be the process. But what we really need is the strong assurance that this would happen soon, and making sure that we are only becoming stronger and receiving all the necessary weapons to fight Russians back, but also to win the war. We have very high hopes for the NATO summit. And you know, over the last 16 months, we have learned to hear the word no so many times about everything, about tanks, about candidacy to European Union, about Patriot missiles, about fighter jets, that we know that when we hear the word no, it's just a beginning of the path for us. And we know to push forward, and we know that this is our next goal, to become a member of NATO.
It is harder and harder, at least in my understanding, for NATO to explain why they wouldn't invite Ukraine at this point. Kira Riddick, a member of the Ukrainian parliament, thank you for coming on and sharing your perspective with us. Coming up, special counsel Jack Smith sits down with two key witnesses in his ongoing criminal probe into Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Remember, he's got two investigations of Trump going on right now. The latest on Trump's legal peril and his political defenders. That's next. Plus, hot and smoky. Millions in the South face a scorching and deadly heat wave as smoky skies and polluted air hits millions more in the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic, and in Spain. I'll explain. The latest forecasts ahead. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As the criminal case against former President Trump over his handling of classified documents proceeds in Florida, the special counsel Jack Smith is now pressing on with his other criminal investigation of the former president, the one surrounding his interference in the 2020 election and the events that led up to January 6th. Today, the special counsel's team interviewed Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who Trump infamously asked to find him the 11,000-plus votes he said he needed to win in that state. Special counsel's office has also spoken to former Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani, according to one of Giuliani's advisors. Meanwhile, we've got more evidence today of the former president's continued grip, though, on the GOP. We got some new parts of our NBC News poll we've been releasing over the last day. And GOP primary voters, their views overwhelmingly align with those of the former president. They're more likely to back a candidate who says Trump won in 2020 and supports pardoning the January 6 rioters. They're less likely to back a candidate who opposes Trump's positions on aid to Ukraine, fighting businesses over LGBTQ issues, or cuts to Social Security and Medicare. Another window into the former president's hold over the party came as House Speaker Kevin McCarthy was forced to backtrack on these comments, questioning whether Trump was the most electable Republican in 2024.
Can he win that election? Yeah, he can.
You think he can?
The question is he the strongest to win the election? I don't know that answer, but can anybody beat Biden? Yeah, anybody can beat Biden. Can Biden beat other people? Yes, Biden can beat him. It's on any given day.
Hours later, after McCarthy was correctly identifying the political situation in the GOP, he told Breitbart, Trump is stronger today than he was in 2016, which is also a very interesting technical answer. He didn't say he was the strongest candidate in 2024. He just simply said he's stronger now than he was in 16. Sahil Kapoor joins me now from Capitol Hill. And Sahil, look, the Kevin McCarthy, watching him do this, his open, the stuff he says the first time, the Benghazi thing, Putin has Trump on a payroll, January 6th, and now this. There is a pattern developing here. But it does seem as if McCarthy's performance did not do enough to calm the Trump waters. Any insight as to why?
Chuck, it is a pattern. McCarthy has in the past briefly stepped out of line with Trump, with MAGA world, but he has a tendency to work to try to win him back. And that's what McCarthy seems to be doing here. Yes, he did that interview with with Breitbart. He also put out a fundraising text message yesterday afternoon in which he said, quote, Trump is the strongest opponent to Biden. He put strongest in all caps. He urged his supporters to stand with Trump now, which sure sounds to me like an endorsement, although that's not what he or his office is calling it. For Trump, he has been willing to accept these instances where McCarthy briefly steps out of line because McCarthy always works to win him back. In this case, McCarthy was simply saying a politer version of what many Republicans are privately saying, which is that Trump isn't the strongest candidate. McCarthy didn't even say that. He simply questioned it. And, that's kind of a mortal sin in MAGA world. You don't do that. You don't question the former president's electoral strength, even though there are 3 elections in which, there is significant evidence to do that. But we see here McCarthy trying to win Trump back. And, Trump has accepted this sort of approach from McCarthy in the past, as long as McCarthy repents.
Is there any timetable on McCarthy endorsing? I mean, as the Speaker of the House, I assume he's supposed to be the official, I think the general chair of the convention. So traditionally, that would mean not endorsing until there's a nominee. But is he feeling pressure now?
Well, he's certainly feeling pressure to be supportive of Trump. Where you draw the line between being supportive of Trump and endorsing him, it might be a distinction without a difference, Chuck. For Kevin McCarthy to say the words, I endorse Trump, it's almost like Michael Scott in The Office declaring bankruptcy. It doesn't have any tangible impact. What's more significant is what McCarthy is doing with the levers of power in the House of Representatives. He is using the official levers of power to bolster Trump in a whole variety of ways. He's punishing his most outspoken Democratic critics, Eric Swalwell, Adam Schiff. There was a recent censure of Schiff. He created a select committee on the weaponization of government that in many ways promotes Trump's narrative that there's a kind of this so-called deep state conspiracy against him. They're going after prosecutors that have charged Trump. They now want to expunge his 2 impeachments. That's what's really significant here, that McCarthy is, using the power that he has to help Trump, to boost him.
And yet, the president's still not grateful enough. Sahil Kapoor reporting for us from Capitol Hill right now. Sahil, thank you. So let's dive into this a little bit more. I'm joined now by Democratic pollster Margie Omero, former Florida Republican Congressman Carlos Corbello, who's, of course, an NBC News analyst. And Carlos, if you're Kevin McCarthy, listen to everything Sahil noted that he's delivered for Trump. This weaponization committee, this sort of Adam Schiff bogus vote, all of these little things that are nothing but window dressing. The impeachment expungements are meaningless to anybody except for Donald Trump. And yet, when he speaks the truth, which is Donald Trump, we don't know if he's the strongest candidate against Joe Biden, a pretty honest assessment, he gets lambasted here. What do you make of it?
Chuck, every once in a while, Kevin McCarthy forgets that Donald Trump expects and demands 100% absolute loyalty. Any straying from the former president, any questioning of the former president is immediately met with a complaint, with a call, either personally from him or from his team. And while most congressional Republicans agree with Kevin McCarthy that Donald Trump is not the strongest candidate for Republicans, that Donald Trump is not good for the long term of the Republican Party or for the country, of course, they don't say this publicly, but there are a good 10 to 20 true believers, Trump true believers in the House, and McCarthy only has 3 or 4 votes to spare on any given day. So McCarthy knows that Trump can activate these members at any given moment and make his life impossible as Speaker of the Republican House.
Well, let's talk about what I wanted to have both of you on here. And Margie, you being a pollster, you know, sometimes I wonder, do you look at what the Republicans are doing and go, I can't believe they're doing this? I can't believe they're going down this road. I mean, when you look at the issue things that we tested, pardoning January 6 rioters and all of these things, and they're popular among Trump's base, and they turn off independent voters. Forget the Democrats. We know they're not with them, but they turn off independent voters. It doesn't look like a party that is trying to do everything it can to defeat Joe Biden.
I mean, I must think about that almost every day, Chuck. I mean, it was funny first to see the speaker really use the language of a polling aggregator, like who's to say what the polls will show down the road, right? There was something funny about that. But yes, when you look at some of the Republican primary positions that the Republican candidates for president have already been out in front with, it shows no interest in really healing the country and bringing it together. It really is about the positions solely for a primary, and it is moving the primary electorate even farther away from where the country is. And I think it's really important to remember where Americans are. I mean, for example, when it comes to the president, a majority, this is from Navigator poll we released on Tuesday, a majority feel the president has committed a crime. They support his indictment. They feel he's unfit for president. It's majority positions. Right. Some of the other positions of the Republican primary party right now in terms of total abortion bans, those are single digit positions. Those are not unifying positions. And it really leads to this fractured feeling that voters of both parties tell me in focus groups every night that they feel.
Carlos, I was thinking about this. You represented a swing district you lost, arguably because of Trump's unpopularity in 2018. When you look at those numbers, there's no doubt about it. Other than not promising not to cut Social Security and Medicare to balance the budget, what could you run on that's popular in the Republican primary like that? You couldn't run on pardoning January 6 rioters in that district, I don't think. You can't run on a 6-week abortion ban. I mean, this does put truly swing district Republicans in a tough spot.
And Chuck, what's shocking to me is that the other GOP presidential primary candidates aren't leading on this issue. They aren't going to the voters and explaining, look at what happened in 2018. Look at what happened in 2020 in swing states and swing districts. Look at what happened in 2022 in swing states and swing districts. Those candidates that were closely aligned with Trump were all defeated. Even some people who weren't closely aligned with Trump were defeated because of his drag on Republican candidates. What do these people have to lose? I mean, if they do nothing, Trump is going to win. If they don't distinguish themselves, if they don't convince a sufficient number of Republican primary voters that their way is better, that Republicans need a better or different candidate, they're going to lose and Trump is going to win. So it's up to them to lead the voters and to explain to the voters why the status quo is no good for the Republican Party.
Maggie, let's flip the script here. Donald Trump is enormously unpopular with middle-of-the-road voters. He can't seem to connect with swing voters.
You have an election that is very far away, and the polls at this stage really reflect what people are coming to the table with in terms of their partisanship, rather than what will happen at the end of a back-and-forth exchange.
And Margie, I apologize there. I have a Margaret in my own house, and we have so many. She's a Marge and a Maggie sometimes, so I apologize.
It's back. Old names Margie, are back. It's okay.
No. But to go back again, what should the White House be? Is there anything that could be done to sort of reassure voters who are not reassured about the president's abilities to finish 4 more years? Is there anything they can do other than him just going out more?
Well, we've seen this. We did a dial group where during the State of the Union, and we saw market increase as people were watching the State of the Union. They were watching the president speak, not through the filter of, I don't want to say cable news, but not through the filter of their news of choice or their commentary of choice. And views for the president, popularity, up for the job, views on whether or not they share his values, all these important metrics moved considerably, even with Republicans, and moved across the board. So having the president out speaking like he's doing right now, talking about his record, talking about where the country's going, those are the kinds of things that people respond to.
And Carlos Corbello, why do you think more Republicans aren't concerned about Trump's ability to do the job?
Well, unfortunately, Donald Trump has become a cult leader in the Republican Party. But I will tell you, Chuck, a sufficient number of Republicans do have concerns about Donald Trump. And that's why Democrats have won races in swing districts and swing states in the last 3 election cycles. So, yes, Joe Biden is a historically weak incumbent for re-election, but the concerns about Donald Trump among a sufficient number of middle-of-the-road Republican voters and obviously many independent voters are very strong. And it's not impossible for Donald Trump to win, and Democrats have to be aware of that. But it would be very difficult, and we have 3 election cycles to demonstrate that. We don't have to wonder what's going to happen. Yeah,
I was just going to say 3. Apparently it takes 3 kicks to the head by a mule. Margie Omero, Carlos Corbello, maybe more than that. Thank you both. Up next, scorching heat in the South, and millions of Americans and even some Europeans are once again dealing with smoky skies and dangerous air quality driven by those Canadian wildfires. That's right. The folks in the westernmost parts of Europe getting that smoke. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Between extreme heat and smoky skies, much of the country is dealing with some form of extreme weather today. Temperatures in Texas are among the hottest on Earth right now, as several cities across that state have hit or even passed the 110-degree mark this week. Across the state, that's also tough on that grid. As you know, Texas has its own electric grid. Across the state, 9 people have died as a result of the heat in recent days, and it's pushing that power grid to its limit. Electrical use was at an all-time high yesterday in Texas, according to the company that operates the state's power grid. And while the South is dealing with scorching heat, parts of the Midwest and Northeast are under poor air quality alerts again, as Canadian wildfire smoke is once again impacting the United States. 127 million people are now at risk. This time it's Minneapolis, Chicago, and Detroit that are getting hit the hardest. Remember the last time it was further east and in the mid-Atlantic. And ready for this? The smoke from those Canadian wildfires is now trapped all across the Atlantic, reaching as far as Spain. So let's get a little bit more on all of this. Our NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns joins me to break down the state of this extreme weather across the United States today. And Bill, it's the clickbait headline, but wow, the smoke made it all the way across the Atlantic.
2,000 miles. And I was questioning, how is that even possible? You just think it has to disperse slowly as it goes across the Atlantic. And actually, someone sent me a famous book that goes back to the 1930s when this last happened. So I guess it's happened before in Europe, but extremely rare. And this smoke that's coming down now from Quebec, I mean, it sat, last night. And it hasn't moved. I mean, that's the problem right now. Oh. Usually the air flows across the country, but now we've added D.C., Philly, New York to the air quality alert. So now we're up to 127 million Americans. That's a little over a third. 1 out of every 3 people in the country has some kind of air quality alert. When you get the purple on the map, that's when we call it very hazardous. And not just for people that, sensitive groups. Very hazardous for anyone that's going to be outside breathing it for an extended period of time. And on and off, that's been the case in Chicago, from Madison, Indianapolis has been bad all day long. Detroit, same with Cleveland, and it really cut off.
Are we canceling sporting events? Are we canceling outdoor sporting events?
I believe that they were thinking about postponing the Cubs game last night. I'm not sure if they're still home tonight or not, or if the schedule changed, going into the weekend. But yeah, I mean, when they had games in the Northeast, when it was like this, especially when you get in the purple air, the Guardians, if they're home today, I didn't check, but that would be unhealthy. That would be smart to cancel that. Yeah, and I noticed that Washington, D.C. now is up into the orange, so that has changed. So slowly, some of this is seeping towards the east. New York's still good, and Boston is still good. And the air quality forecast, we are going to take the smoke and continue it, pushing it east, but this time it's actually is going to break apart, Chuck. It's not going to be like 2-3 weeks ago for the East Coast tomorrow. You'll notice, especially the sunrise and sunset, that orange kind of glow, but it won't be like the apocalypse.
Right. And let's talk Texas real quick, because they always have that grid that can get overdone very quickly. How many more days of this extreme heat should they expect? Because that grid can sometimes not hold.
Yeah, I think one thing you'll find interesting, I just read this, the solar being produced in Texas is so strong today that they actually had to shut some of it off because, just the blazing sun. So that's a good sign for renewables, by the way, that it's working. So as far as the heat goes, we got a little bit of a break in South Texas. They deserve it. They need it. Del Rio, 10 straight days of record highs. I don't think you're going to break it today. But the humidity with the heat is spreading. And Little Rock's one of the worst locations. It feels like 115 degrees in Little Rock right now in the shade. And this is what's going to spread over the next 2 days throughout the South. So as far as everyone wants to know, will it stick around all weekend? Is it going to stick around for the 4th? Things are going to moderate. It's still going to be hot. It's the 4th of July holiday. It's supposed to be hot, but it's not going to be this like excessive crazy heat. In Memphis, Saturday's 100. We get to 93 on Monday. Other areas like Atlanta go from the upper 90s to mid 90s. So I think we're going to have a lot less of these headlines, Chuck, after we get past the next 2 days.
All right, Bill Cairns with the latest on what we can expect over this long one national holiday, 2 weeks off, apparently. Bill Cairns, thank you. After the break, Nikki Haley hits the trail in battleground New Hampshire 1 day after hitting Trump's, quote, moral weakness on China. We're on the ground in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Next, you're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley is back on the campaign trail holding voter events in New Hampshire today. She's not alone. There's quite a few candidates in New Hampshire. The trip comes after Haley broke from many of her fellow Republican primary candidates yesterday and chose to use the day to criticize former President Donald Trump. Haley hit at the former president, not on his legal troubles, but about his relationship with China's President Xi Jinping, saying he showed, quote, moral weakness in his approach to China during his administration. Well, our correspondent who covers the Haley campaign is Ali Vitale. She's in Portsmouth right now. And it's very interesting with Nikki Haley, Ali, is that, so today we're reporting that Nikki Haley is taking on Donald Trump. And if you told me in 3 days we're reporting that Nikki Haley's backing up on Donald Trump on something, that wouldn't be a surprise. Is this a pivot to pay attention to, or is this just a China-specific hit?
Chuck, I don't even have to wait 3 days to tell you in this instance, because yesterday at the American Enterprise Institute, conservative think tank in D.C., at that speech, yes, she did hit Trump for moral weakness on China and not doing enough in U.S.-China relations to tilt the balance of power back in the U.S. direction. Now, today, she gave very similar themes to her speech, similarly foreign policy focused today in New Hampshire, but no mention of Trump at all. This is something that yesterday she brought up herself. Today, she did not bring it up at all, and certainly voters were not asking Trump-centered questions at this foreign policy event. But it is notable that Haley, in a room of academics and reporters in Washington, is willing to criticize her former boss, perhaps in the clearest terms that we've heard yet. But out here on the campaign trail, we did not hear her directly reference him. And I think that's one of the things that I seized on with voters after. It's something that I think they took note of. And I was in some ways surprised, especially given New Hampshire is such Trump country, the way that these voters talk to me. I mean, listen to this. Watch.
I went in with a very open mind. I wanted to hear what she had to say, and she's just so strong in foreign policy, which makes me realize that's what's going to be important in this election.
Is that a top issue for you?
Definitely, yes.
I didn't hear you guys say Trump. We just were talking about that.
I love his policies. But it makes me ill to think of 4 years of what we went through with him, to have that happen again.
So look, you and I both know it's really early in the process. I found not just those two voters saying that, though, but another man as well who was here listening to Nikki Haley saying that he wants someone else, whether it's DeSantis or Haley, he doesn't care who. He just thinks that by the time you get to December, this cannot be a 14, 15-person primary because that only benefits Trump. As you and I have talked about, that's now something that voters are internalizing as well. And as they're candidate shopping right now, they're trying to figure out, all right, who are the 2 or 3 that should be left? But there is an openness.
Allie, I'm just curious, who runs these events for Haley? Is it her super PAC or is it the campaign? Do you notice both groups there? Do they not bump into each other? I'm just curious how that campaign works. 'Cause I know they have some money issues that it might be more in the super PAC than the day-to-day campaign. Do you see both entities?
Yeah, I mean, certainly not to the degree that we see it with the DeSantis folks, where the campaign is basically the super PAC. I think here for Haley, today's event was run by a Morgan Ortagus-aligned group. That's why it was foreign policy focused. But generally speaking, it's the Haley campaign that puts these on. I think the super PAC in Haley land is supposed to be something that sort of bolsters eventually on the airwaves and spaces like that. But again, you're right. The money is not here to the extent that it's there with other 2024 contenders.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I've noticed she's already kind of living off the land because I had a feeling this wasn't her event today. And she's having to do more of those. Sometimes that's a yellow flag about some finance issues. Ali Vitale, a wonderful backdrop in Portsmouth. Good luck trying to get you to come back. Thank you. Still to come, the president hits the road to push his economic agenda as the White House tries to win over skeptical and struggling voters heading into 2024. I'll talk to a senior advisor on economics to the president next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Turning now to a notable shift in messaging strategy from the White House as President Biden faces voters anxious about the future of the economy and skeptical of his ability to handle the issue. President Biden hit the road today with an address on Bidenomics, embracing a term that has been used widely by his critics to knock his record on the economy. Kind of like Obamacare, they've chosen to embrace it. Now the president is trying to rebrand the term as his administration makes the argument that its policies are working and the economy is recovering.
Bidenomics is about building an economy from the middle out and the bottom up, not the top down. Bidenomics, we're turning this around. I believe that every American willing to work hard should be able to get a job no matter where they are. In the heartland, in small towns, in every part of this country, to raise their kids on a good paycheck and keep their roots where they grew up. That's Bidenomics.
While there have been some good economic indicators out there, inflation has slowed down, and unemployment is extraordinarily low, and consumer confidence is ticking back up, it hasn't yet convinced voters. And who knows if that is an explanation that everybody lives in their own worlds, or if it's real. According to an April poll from our friends at CNBC, just 14% said the economy was excellent or good, compared to 85% who said the economy was fair or poor. So joining me now is Gene Sperling. He's a senior advisor to President Biden. He's also served in the last 2 Democratic White Houses. And Gene, it's fascinating to me because in the summer of '95 and the summer of 2011, my gosh, you and I probably had this conversation in the summer of 2011. Here it is, a Democratic administration feels like it has to explain what it's done in the economy to a group of voters. Now, by 2012, Barack Obama had won his argument. By 1996, Bill Clinton had won his argument. Do you think you're in the same position, or is this a tougher sell?
Look, I think there's a lot of reasons to be positive about voters and the appreciation of Bidenomics and President Biden's record. Look, we understand. I mean, we've all dealt with the last few years of the pandemic. Yes, I will tell you, and you will know that inflation in the United States is lower than in the rest of the G7, that it's only been 2.2% the last 3 months. But we understand people have had to deal with the pandemic, with COVID, with some higher prices, and that may have affected people's sense of the economy. But a few positive points, Chuck. One, when you ask people about their job satisfaction or their personal financial satisfaction, it's pretty positive. Number two, overwhelming majorities support what the president's doing. So when people understand, did you know that President Biden has passed this major infrastructure or the semiconductor, or that the issue you heard from the previous president that didn't go so well has succeeded magnificently under President Biden, which is reinvesting in America, a manufacturing boom. You hear that from independent sources all the time. And my last point would be, there is one time we saw a test, and that was the midterm elections. And, you know, I was on a lot of shows where people were saying exactly this, but, you know, oh, voters are down. But when they actually went to the polls, they judged that President Biden's economic record, or that he was fighting on their behalf, or that things were getting better, was enough for him to have historic gains in the gubernatorial, to actually hold the Senate and gain a speak. So let's just say that's been the one true test of voters. And it actually went, you know, I understand some of that was the reaction to Dobbs, but certainly it also reflected the fact that there was more satisfaction with the economic record than some of those polls show.
Look, I take your point on people feeling more satisfied perhaps in their own job. But, I think one of the real reasons why people don't feel like this is a good economy is that they're either trapped in the house they live in, or they can't sell their house that they'd like to sell because interest rates are too high, right? Like, I do think the housing end of this is probably why you're having a hard time convincing people this is a healing economy.
You know, Chuck, these are all good things to discuss, and I don't know that you or I could give a definitive answer. I would say that one of the things that's been more encouraging on core inflation is we are starting to see, you know, rental prices come down. That's good for renters. You know, maybe people feel differently if they're a homeowner. But I think that the real issue is that we had a remarkably robust recovery that led to historically low unemployment, has now led to real wage gains, which led to record job creation. But, you know, you weren't going to have 5% growth or 500,000 jobs forever. We're in that period of transition. The Federal Reserve is giving the economy some tough medicine. That's having some perhaps positive effect. Will have some positive effect on core inflation and renters, but some negative effect. You know, those things will go through, and people will have to make a judgment. But I think overall, when you hear the president talking about Bidenomics, about the idea that it's not about trickle down, it's about investing in people, it's about bringing public investment here. You know, and Chuck, you talk about you and I talking 20, 30 years ago. It used to be if the government was investing, it was going to crowd out private investment. Now we've seen when you do infrastructure, semiconductors, when you commit to manufacturing, 500 billion crowds in. That's going to offer this economy a lot of resilience. And over the next year, a lot of people are going to be seeing those benefits in programs they support that every day, every month, more people are going to see as benefiting them due to Bidenomics.
All right, let me ask you a long-term question here. Today, the CBO came out with a projection on U.S. debt. It's going to hit a record 107% of GDP. Now, again, I accept the notion that all of the, the sky is falling over the last 30 years. Oh, my God, we're going to go to 50%, 75%, 80%. And this economy handles it, and it handles it. Is 100% of GDP too much?
Well, Chuck, there are different levels of debt. There's the public debt, which is what we should be concerned about. I think that there is different disputes right now. There is less, I think, clarity on what is the exact amount than there might have been 10 years ago. And I think that's something that's not just a Democrat or Republican issue. Serious economists debate that. I do think that having responsible fiscal discipline is something the president believes in. In his case, having a robust recovery, having the American Rescue Plan get the recovery going well, did lead to exceptional revenues that brought the deficit down. You know, but we've also seen there's been a complete rejection of the president's proposals that are cutting spending by looking for lower drug costs and being tougher on big pharma, or asking the most well-off to pay their fair share. And we're not seeing a bipartisan willingness to, I think, consider some of those measures, which would be critical to deficit reduction.
Right. Well, Gene, I think we all know we won't care about the debt until after the fact, till after it impacts everything, never before. Gene Sperling, on behalf of the White House, thank you. And thank you all for being here. I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.